Hi, good afternoon. How are you all? I hope all of you are doing well. I hope all of you have had a good last few days. All right. And my name is Abhilash, and welcome to the lecture 5 of Folklore and Culture Studies. All right. I hope you're enjoying this journey so far. I am enjoying this journey, right? So let's do a quick, status check or a progress check of where we stand in terms of the curriculum. So right now we are doing the main topic, which is folklore and culture, the conceptual perspectives. I'm just referring to my notes here. That's what we are doing now. Under which we have the unit one, right, which is folklore issues and methods. And that's the block one, and which the unit one is folklore issues and methods, which in the previous four lectures is what we've covered. We've covered the history, we've covered the genres, we've covered the functionality, right? So we're done with unit one. Today, we will start with unit two. And let's quickly check what we have in unit two. In unit two, we have the brief history of folklore studies with special reference to India. So that's what we will cover in Unit 2. It will be briefly divided into, let's say, 4 to 5 lectures again. And I will quickly take you through as to what do we have in store today. So today we will cover the objectives of this Unit 2, an introduction to Unit 2, and we will also cover early philology and the Grimm brothers. Right, so that's what we will cover for today. Before we dive deep into the subject, right? A couple of things I just want to share with you, right? Number one is if you do have any feedback for these sessions, do share in the comment box. So for instance, let's say if you like it, please do type in the comment box so that I know that I'm in the right direction. If you don't like something, please do mention that as well. I'm open to feedback and suggestions. If you have any specific requests, for instance, let's say if you want to know an answer to a particular question, of all the topics that we've covered so far, do type in the comment box so that I can answer those for you. And let's say if you have a question which is out of the lectures that we've covered, and perhaps I may not know the answer, what I'm going to do for you is I'm going to find that out and share that with you all, right? This is your channel, and please ensure that let's ensure we keep it engaging. So that's number one. And the second point I wanted to tell you is towards the end of the session, right, I'm going to post a question for all of you. So if you're listening to this lecture, please ensure you participate in these questions, right, so that it becomes an exercise for you. It becomes, it helps you in your practice as well. So that's the second point. And the third point is if you like these lectures, you might want to consider subscribing to this channel so that every time I post a new video, you get a notification of that. All right. So that's that. And with that, again, let me introduce myself. My name is Abhilash. I'm a student of folklore and culture studies. I follow the MA IGNO curriculum. And yes, if you're watching this video for the first time, I recommend that you watch it from the lecture one or the episode one or the podcast one, so that it's sequential in manner, and everything is in hierarchy in sequence, so you don't miss out the flow. So that's that. And without much ado, let us quickly get started with the session for today. All right. So like I've already mentioned, what are we going to discuss today is we're going to discuss the unit 2, which is brief history of folklore studies with special reference to India. And today we will cover the objectives, introduction, and early philology and the Grimm brothers, the contribution of Grimm brothers. If you recall, in lecture one, there was a mention of the Grimm brothers, and where I had mentioned we'll talk about them in details. So you haven't watched the lecture one or the previous lectures or sessions or podcasts, please ensure that you listen to them as well. So that's that. All right. So without much ado, let's quickly get started then. So what is this objective of Unit 2 is, let's try and understand. And yes, as I forgot to mention this today, right? Why should you be listening to these lectures? Is because I go through the subject myself, I conduct my research, and I simplify the concept for you. So if you're a student of folklore and culture studies, everything becomes simple. All you have to do is just follow it, episode by episode, or session by session, right? And if you are a culture enthusiast, this will give you a lot of information as well, a lot of information about folklore and culture studies. And let's say, if you are appearing for UGC or NET examination, that's where this concept can help you as well, right? So these are the reasons as to why you should be listening to folklore and culture studies. So with that, let's get started with the objectives. All right, so the objective, what's objective number one, is to understand the beginning and growth of folklore studies in India in particular, and in other parts of the world in general as well. So we'll understand the growth and beginning of folklore studies not only in India, and also India in particular, right? And also in other parts of the world in general as well. So that's the first objective. The second objective is to explain the ideological concept for the study of and the interest in folklore, and explain the diversity of perceptions about folklore in different places and at different times. This is what, it makes the subject very interesting, because I've already mentioned this previously. The commonality of the term, right? At different places, at different cultures, at different times, people have had a different definition of folklore. But what brings all of it together is, it's interesting about the subject. So we'll talk about that as well. So that's about the objective of not this session. This is the objective of this unit, right? For instance, let's say if this unit continues for 4 to 5 lectures, this is the objective for all the 4 to 5 lectures, right? So that's that. And let's move on to the introduction part. All right. So, an introduction in this unit, we will discuss in detail that although the folklore materials such as tales, songs, etc., are as old as human society, the systematic study of these materials in the spirit of modern academics is of relatively recent origin. This is interesting. Let's read it again. We will discuss in detail that although the folklore materials such as tales, stories, etc., is as old as human society, the systematic study of these materials in the spirit of modern academics is of relatively recent origin. Now, what does that mean? It means that although we have, the folklore materials have been existing since time, immemorial. For example, the stories, the songs, those are very old, right? And other materials as well. However, what is new or what is relatively recent is the systematic study of these materials, right? And in the form of, or in the field of modern academics. What does it mean? That although these things existed, right, since a long time, since ages, but people or the society, we've sort of made brought that into the modern academics study. We're studying about the study of folklore is relatively recent, is what this statement says. The beginning of modern folklore studies can be tracked back in the 19th century's Europe, especially in Germany. Right, we've already established that in previous lectures. The beginning of modern folklore studies can be tracked back in the 19th century's Europe, especially in Germany, when scholars and intellectuals started giving serious interests in the collection and the study of the folklore materials in various forms such as folk tales, folk songs, traditional customs, etc., that existed in their surrounding society. So the study of the beginning of the modern folklore goes back to 19th century's Europe, particularly Germany. However, it is important to know that such interest on folklore resources, initially in Europe and later in other parts of the world, were triggered by diverse motivation. that arouse out of different social and political and historical contexts, right? So what it means that the interest of folklore resources, to know about the folklore resources, they initially started in Europe and later part of the world, were triggered through diverse motivation, means which means that there were different reasons for it. And one of the strong reasons, and different reasons of different contexts, for example, social context, political context, historical context also existed, right? One of the strong reasons, if you've been listening to these lectures, was the rise of nationalism, right? That's an example of a political context. Some of the scholars wanted to preserve, right, and pass the folklore culture from generation to generation. That can be a social context of how it started and the preservation of the folklore studies and material started. All right. Moving on. Unlike the cases in more stable disciplines such as history and natural sciences, the growth and development of folklore studies as an academic subject had to pass through considerable differences and confusions. Right. So what it means is, the study of folklore as an academic subject, for instance, right now, right? You are listening, perhaps you're listening to this lecture because you are a student like me, right? So now this is a formal structure. So what this statement says is, for it to become an academic structure, the folklore had to go through a lot of differences and confusions, right? Because different people had different opinions about it, and so on and so forth. Such differences were primarily regarding the meaning of the term folklore itself. Isn't it interesting, right? The even today, right? Forget about the duration when it started. Even today, you the moment you talk about the term folklore, for instance, when I share this with a few friends of mine, and I tell them that folklore, the instant image that comes to their mind is, it's about old things, old people, or about low class people, peasant population, but that's not necessarily true. And the confusion or the differences, like it says, such differences were primarily regarding the name. The differences were right from the name itself, and which was used to mean both the study materials of the subject, right? So besides that, countries follow different practices to label a diverse set of cultural resources as folklore materials, which means the definition of what would you consider as a folklore material. Every country, or let me put it across this way, not all countries had a common label what all things can be categorized as a folklore material. Different countries had different yardsticks for that. In some parts of Europe and South America, the term folklore was used to mean the so-called unsophisticated peasant culture. This is exactly what we discussed, right? Particularly in some parts of Europe and South America, folklore was used to mean the so-called unsophisticated peasant. Peasant is a farmer population, right? The community performances of music, dance, and festival. In the United States, on the other hand, folklore was understood as the relics of the past, such as ballads, tales, and superstitions. So things of the past. In the United States, folklore was considered as a thing of the past, not so modern, right? So do you see a difference, right? And that's exactly what they're trying to say, that a lot of countries had different labels of what folklore is, of what folklore material is, right? Because of the very nature of folklore materials, they have been um, the subject of study of scholars from various disciplines such as literary studies, anthropology, psychology, etc., right? Because the nature is such diverse, so a lot of people from different fields or subjects, or different scholars from different subjects and disciplines, people from anthropology, people from psychology, history, started to know more about it. While this has resulted to enrich folklore studies with theoretical and methodological contributions from multiple disciplines, it also caused folklore studies to remain annexed to any one of these subjects in the institutional setups. What it means is, while Firstly, because a lot of people from different disciplines dived in, deep into it to understand about it. Somewhere, folklore found its annexure, which means there was a mention of folklore in all these subjects somewhere or the other. That's what, especially in subjects in the institutional setups, in the academic fields. Institutional setups could mean a college or university. Folklore found its space initially in the annexure, annexure is nothing but a small portion in a big topic or a subject, right? So folklore studies could emerge as an independent academic departments in universities and colleges only in the 20th century. So only in the 20th century, right? It kind of emerged as a independent academic departments. Until those, it used to be an annexure to other subjects like anthropology, psychology, or history. But today, it has found its place as an independent academic department, right? Which is why you and I are connected through this video or podcast. So that's about the introduction of folklore studies, right? So that's about that. So we've covered the objectives of this unit. We've covered the introduction. Let's quickly move on to early philology and the contribution of the Grimm brothers. So, what is to start off? Let's try and understand what is philology. Philology is the study of the historical development of languages, right? How a particular language developed. Study of that is called as philology. The philological inquiries mostly sought for the root or the origin of languages and the etymologies of different words in a language, right? So philology as a study is how mostly about how a language originated, from where did it start, what was the root, right? So, and different words in a particular language. So that's the meaning of philology. And in the 19th century Germany, it was Jacob Grimm, right? The duration, his lifetime, it is 1785 to 1863, who emerged to be the most prominent activist in this field, who extensively collected German folklore materials for the purpose of his study on the root of German language, which means in the 19th century Germany, Jacob Grimm was is initially one of the you know prominent activists in this field who extensively collected German, particularly German folklore materials. And obviously, the study was the purpose was the study and the root of German language, right? German words, folk narratives such as myths and tales as well. Eventually, he not only brought the monumental German dictionary, right? He was one of the person who got the monumental German dictionary, right? But also compiled with his brother, right? That's why we call the Grimm brothers. The first person was Jacob Grimm, and his brother was Wilhelm Grimm, 1786 to 1859. Some very important books. So both of them compiled some of very important books, such as Deutsche Mythology. Right? What is it? Mythology is it's a collection of German myths, right? And kind of Horse Martian. I mean, it is in French. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly, but the English version of that is Children's and Household Tales, popularly known as Grimm's Fairy Tales. Right. So both the Grimm brothers wrote or compiled these fairy tales and children and household tales, which imparted decisive influences in study and publishing of folklore materials in later times. So initially, it became a lot of, there was a lot of content that they collated and compiled, which later was published as folklore material in later times. So that's that. And they took interest in folkloric resources. They took interest in folkloric resources as the means to trace the root of German language. So, their interest in folkloric resources was one of the ways to trace the roots of German language as to how the German language started, right? And also to collect everything that is German, right? A drive triggered by the romantic nationalist feeling which had been initiated by previous German scholars like Herder. We've spoken about Herder in the previous lectures or sessions, right? So it was initiated by Herder was a romantic nationalist, which means he was a nationalist, and that drive was already created, and the interest of Grimm brothers, interest to research more, helped helped collate um, you know help collate or help find out more resources about the folklore materials. The traditional culture resources of the peasant communities were regarded by the intellectuals as a precious remnants of the glorious past. So the traditional cultural resources of the peasant communities are the farmer people who are farmers are peasants essentially, were regarded by the intellectual. So the intellectual group sort of thought that the traditional cultural resources which the peasant community used, they thought those were the precious remnants are remainings of the glorious past. So that was one version what the intellectuals thought about the folklore materials as well. So that's that. However, in their course of work, which was primarily a linguistic investigation. Now, what is linguistics? Linguistics is something related to languages, a study of languages, right? So there, the Grimm brothers' work was primarily a linguistic investigation, which means they wanted to know how the German language started, what was its origin, and etc. and etc. So Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm paved the way for the collection, methodology of study, and publishing of folkloring materials. So which means that initial the primary work was about linguistic investigation. However, that paved the way, which means that made the way for the collection of methodology of study and publishing of folklore materials. So although their initial motive was something else, but these all things were byproducts, as and when their journey progressed. So, influence of Jacob Grimm upon the European folklist in subsequent times was enormous. So, Jacob Grimm's contribution upon the European folklorists in the later times, that's enormous. And of course, both the brothers had enormous contribution. His entire conceptual framework, which employed diachronic study of German oral poetry and narratives, influenced directly to the emergence of a theoretical perspective such as mythological school in later times, right? So with his entire conceptual framework, his entire approach, right, starting from the research of language to the collection of methodology and study and publishing, all of that eventually led to the emergence is something which emerges or comes out, emergence of a theoretical perspective that led to the origin of a theoretical perspective, which is called as mythological school in later times, right? So that's that. So let's quickly recap what we've covered in this lecture 5. We've covered the introduction, we've covered the objectives of this unit, we did the introduction and early philology and Grimm brothers. So that's what we've done today, and that's the first lecture of Unit 2, and we will have different lectures of Unit 2, in subsequent sessions. And so that's all we have for today. And as promised, give me one moment. And as promised, we do have a question for you all at the end, right? And the question so if you're listening to this lecture, the question for you is, who were Grimm brothers, and what is their role in folklore studies, right? So let me repeat the question: who were Grimm brothers, What is their role in folklore studies? That's a question. So if you're listening to this lecture or podcast, I strongly recommend that you type it in the comment box. You don't have to write a complete essay, but even if you have one or two or 3 points, do that will really help us, engage. And that's also a knowledge check for you all. So if you're interested, we can continue this in every session. So that's all we have. And one more recommendation again, that if you like these lectures, podcasts, and the sessions, please do subscribe to this channel, and please type in the comment box as well. And let us enjoy this journey of folklore and culture studies together. Right, I'm signing off today. My name is Abhilash, and we'll catch up soon in our next session. Till then, stay healthy, take care of yourself, enjoy the journey of culture studies. Bye bye.